Hi, good day to everyone. Thanks for joining in and glad that you stayed through the lovely music interlude and for this panel. And for those who do not know me, my name is Winston Thomas, Editor-in-Chief for CDOTrends. And we began with a fantastic note with a panel moderated by my colleague Lachlan. Today, as Lachlan was alluding to at the end of his panel, we have a topic that we have heard quite a bit about, and we have written a lot about, which is the democratization of data and AI. But instead of looking at strategies, best practices, and promises, we will be looking at it from the perspective of four technologies: RPA, low code or no code tools, AutoML, and auto triggers for prescriptive actions. If we have time, we will end on a data culture note. To add to this wisdom and practical insights, we have three leading data leaders joining us. From the data science side, we have Albert Suryadi, General Manager of Data Science at Mirvac. We have also Conor O'Neill, Head of Data Science, Compare the Market Australia. Thanks, guys, for joining in. And from the business side, even though he promised that he started his life on the technology end, we have Denis Jimenez, Group General Manager, BI and Analytics, Event Hospitality and Entertainment. Thanks, everyone, for joining in.
All right, glad to be here.
Again, this discussion is about you, the audience. So please join in by asking questions. You can use the Q&A button anytime, and I will be moderating this question and posing those questions to our panelists. Now, let's dive in. And I think, Albert, I'll be asking you the first question. We are talking about removing the data science skills needed to do data science, using automation and machine language playing a big part. Now, where are the gaps in the current practices that vendors tend to gloss over? What is on your wish list? Albert?
What is on my wish list? I think for me the wish is actually quite simple. I think for people to give it benefit of doubt, because for example, right, again, let's have a look at kind of developing AI and ML solutions. Many data scientists love and have done doing it themselves, right? Using Python and create a lot of fancy algorithms. However, once we're in the corporate world, sometimes success is its own kind of curse. They were like, okay, great that you show me this great POC and it works. Now I want 10 of them, and can I have them next week? So the only way I think the data scientists to be able to do it is I call it kind of to delegate, and in this way to delegate to obviously kind of machines. And that's why there's been a lot of innovations in the area of AutoML that could really help people get more productive, so that we can achieve the broader business outcomes beyond just kind of the rigor of just statistics and mathematics. So I think for me, really, that's probably kind of my wish list. It's really just on the thinking, because I believe a lot of the technology and how to do it exists in the market.
And yes, and there is a lot of articles in the market that talks about the gap in expectations, where the data science team is inundated with lots of requests, and they have to choose which request actually it's more important for the organization. And I guess we will be talking about AutoML later, but yes, it is important as we move forward. Conor, do you feel that you face the same issues and Compare the Market?
Yeah, I think so. Your question around sort of where are the gaps in vendors, I think vendors focus primarily on filling the technology gaps. And I think there's been a lot of progress in that space, especially in the last 5 years, which has been really good. It sort of meant you don't necessarily have to customize, all your microservices themselves, or you can get off, doing things locally or on premises a bit easier. And there are still obviously, new roles that have come out of doing that, like ML ops professionals and so forth, to manage some of those things. But even that, and I'm sure we'll talk about later, how the roles are evolving, even that sort of we like to automate things, right? So we tend to be able to automate our own skill sets. One thing that we can't automate is the business and how the business thinks about the questions they care about and how they're going to utilize the analytic products that can be created. So in terms of bottlenecks and things for focus, yes, the technology one I think is front and center that everyone talks about, but I think the business side, the culture side, the literacy side is really, really critical. And I suppose if you're thinking from a vendor perspective, it would be nice to see a focus on, hey, what would this look like for most business users where they don't understand data science? They might not understand how to pose a question in the first place, even their day-to-day tasks, how they think about those problems, and take that lens. So a much more of a soft approach. That could be interesting, I think.
Thanks, Conor. Denis, from the business side, do you feel the same thing? Do you feel reframing or framing a problem statement is one of the biggest issues?
Yeah, well, I think that, from the business perspective, for me, the biggest one is always creating the business case, right? And the ROI, and try to justify that. And I think with AutoML and the way some vendors are now approaching that challenge is easier, because you can quickly turn around and build something that it might not be perfect, but it can show the value to the business. And I guess the goal with the business is to show them something, a model, a prediction, and for them to say, I don't want this to be turned off, right? So that's the best business case, right? And I think AutoML is actually helping us with that, because before we needed to kind of make them believe in us and in something that they don't really see and understand, and say, hey, I'm going to build this amazing model and it's going to predict this beautiful thing that you have never been able to predict properly, but I need this much money. And they just need to trust you. But now with AutoML, I think they can see it. So I think that's a big advance. Yeah.
Albert, coming from what Denis was talking about, and you alluded to it earlier, one issue with AutoML, which we'll dive into now, is basically it allows you to scale, as well as it speeds up deployments, data initiative deployments. But what other use cases are driving the adoption of AutoML, or are these two the main use cases that is actually driving it?
Yeah, I think that the use cases, the main driving force for AutoML, I think similar to what Denis is mentioned, right? Sort of, it's about showing value, really fast, and in a way that's also, remember, we're not in in the corporate world. We want the value of any data science models is not once it's developed, it's once it's productionized. So it really, the pressure is on, and there's a lot. So I think that's kind of really the driving force within AutoML. Yes, it doesn't produce the model with the best accuracy, right? I think that needs a lot of tuning and data scientists and custom built models. But really, even if you work from, I call it out of the box model and out of the box ML ops pipeline, I think there would be already significant improvements that can be shown and that can be delivered. But also importantly, again, as mentioned below, it's really just showing and allowing the business to understand what this whole area of AI actually is.
Conor, do you share the same opinion?
I do. I think for me, the main use cases are twofold. The first is for prototyping and rapid proof of concept for data scientists or technical people, and then the second is for those sort of citizen data scientist type roles, helping them to get something out that might be better than what they had before. In terms of them seeing the value, that can be nice in that they get their hands on the tools, but there's also a barrier to them doing that and being comfortable with that. Even today, I still, have some people around who aren't comfortable using Excel, even though it is essentially assumed for most people at this point. A lot of people still, numbers, they don't like them. They want outcomes. They don't want to think about the numbers. And so I found that the best way for the engagement is to help similar to the question before, helping them think through the problem and think, what is it that you're actually trying to solve? Go back to the first principles of what they're trying to solve. Don't ask them for the solution, ask them what the problem is, and then we can work through that together. And if machine learning is a good use case for it, in particular, if it's something where it might be best in their hands, then AutoML can play a really nice role there.
And as you use AutoML, the one interesting part I wanted to also understand is how does this actually change the relationship with the business? Maybe Albert, you can start on that perspective.
Yeah, I think how it changes the relationship with the business, I think it really echoes what actually Conor mentioned, right? So, building predictive models is quite laborious. There's a lot of work. But again, unfortunately, in business, it's very, yes, we spend all that hard work and we only put 2% in really actually communicating to the business. And I don't think we do that well, right? So what AutoML changes is, I think it's building the bridge where data scientists is just, okay, I don't have to worry too much because a lot of the out of the box is pretty good, and I can actually frame it to kind of actually communicating the model interpretability to the business, and even actually shaping the whole problem of the modeling itself, and eventually also how this model eventually could be used. Once your model is done, it's not just, okay, the model speaks by itself. It doesn't. You actually need to figure it out with the campaign teams to design A/B testing and lots of other things. So I think what it gives is frankly, building the bridge because it gives everyone more time.
Building the bridge, Conor, same? You agree with that?
In terms of how it changes the relationship with the business?
Yeah,
I think so. I think it does. I think it helps. What I like to frame it as is assume the model works. I can say, just assume the model you want actually works, and let's go from there. How are you going to utilize it? Because oftentimes the question that is asked is, can we predict this thing? Let's just assume that you can. Now, what are you going to do with it? Because the value only comes when you utilize the output of that model. And AutoML allows you to then sort of start to think about it in that way a little bit faster, because yes, you still have to do a fair bit of tooling, but it's reduced depending on the extent of the AutoML. And so it puts it back to the whole purpose of data science, which is to provide the business with value through some new nice analytical tooling, and say, well, what is that value? How are you going to utilize this output? And also then that helps to frame what do you need for the model, what inputs might be relevant, start thinking feature engineering and so forth, which obviously will massively help your AutoML. So yeah, it's about framing it from a value perspective, I think.
Denis, from a business perspective, how is AutoML closing the expectation gap? Because there is always a huge expectation gap that the senior management wants out of the data science team, but the data science team is only so many people with so many processes or pipelines.
Before I answer to that question, I really like what Conor said in terms of understanding. There was a time a few years back that I don't know why, but we were, I think, or that's my experience, we were all trying to make sure that the business understand how AI works or that machine learning model works. And we were focused on it, trying to explain them how it works. But I like what you say, Conor, that is true, that what is important is forget about the model. Let's assume that it's working. You don't need to understand how. But this is going to be the outcome. What are you going to do about it? What is the business action? What is the value behind? But I was talking to the head of data science a couple of days ago in New South Wales government. I don't remember what area, but he gave me a really good analogy, talking about cars and saying that people know that a car will take them from one place to another faster than walking. Does everyone that is driving a car really understand how the gears are working, how the pedals are, communicating with the engine? Not really, and nobody really cares. What is important, right, is that it's what is going to happen, and as far as you're comfortable with that trip and that speed, I guess that's something that is interesting as well from the GDR perspective. But
Denis, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I just mute myself. Yeah. But going back to your question, the expectation gap with the business, we already talk about the proof of concept, or I like it to call it as well proof of value. So it helps that showing that value. But also I like to think that when you are giving that tool to not a data scientist that the business might not really understand, because sometimes, we go to a room and the team is really technical and the business is nodding, but they don't really understand what the data scientists are talking about. But this gives the power to people that they trust, the senior managers trust, because it's people around the business that know the business, that I've been doing it for a while. And if that person is the one selling this, model and showing them the outcome, that gap is kind of closer to be closed, if I can say that way. But, so they trust the person that is bringing that solution to them more than someone in the back end in IT, really technical. So for me, that's also really, really interesting, but it's happening little by little.
Thanks. Looking at what Denis just mentioned, Conor, and how do you actually build that strong interface with business to bring that data science to the business and not to make them afraid of data science, so that they can actually look at it as a tool to explore the questions they really want to ask and not be fast or by the technology behind it?
Yeah, I think the way is to get out of the technical lens. So obviously when you go back to your desk, you have to think technically, but when you're talking to the business, they don't care. They want to use a tool to do something that's going to benefit their area of the business. So it's about focusing on that. It's about, hey, what might be possible? My screen's on very dark. What might be possible if this were true? So discussing what data they have, what are the problems that they care about, how might they go about solving them? And similar to my comment before around assume the thing works. So especially, most of the places I've worked, the main data sources are relational, tabular data, which, is closer to the business and what it's used to. So that also is typically why you can ask the question, well, let's assume that we can predict this outcome. Oftentimes you can do better than a guess, and hopefully better than business logic that may or may not already exist around the problem. So really the way to, I think, drop the barriers to say, okay, cool, what problems might you solve? What if we did such and such a thing? What if you didn't have to think through the logic of how you would target a particular group, because you have a feedback mechanism that helps to do that for you. And so you're making their job easier. They know they want to personalize something, but they're not sure the best way. Okay, cool. Let's not think about the technical side. Let's think about what's the best outcome for the customer or the area of that business. By the way we'll enable it is through this technology, and that might have some requirements and potentially might need some investment maybe. But that way you focus on the business value once again.
Thanks, Conor. Albert, I'm just wanting to understand, are our AutoML tools and solutions mature enough? Especially the ideal situation is to look for hyperparameters for the model and then set up, use multiple sets of this to train models in parallel. I mean, that is in theory, looks fine and dandy, but is that really happening, or are we looking at workarounds to make this work?
No, I actually think the AutoML actually, the tools and the algorithms actually works. What seems to need improvements are usually two levels. One is, and I'll go through a bit more in detail. One is the business understanding, and second is the data pipeline, right? So I often tell with my data scientists, don't just kind of build the model just like as is. No, understand the business problem. Then, because you need that to shape your predictive model. For example, you don't need to build a predictive model on your whole customer base. For example, if you only know that only your 20% of your dormant customers are problematic, just build the model on this. You'll be more relevant, and your model will be just more, stronger. So, that needs business understanding. And sometimes that's not taking enough. And when data scientists put AutoML as just like straight away magic box, it doesn't work, because you need to shape what goes in there, like, garbage in, garbage out. Now, the second part is, again, is the data engineering pipelines as well, right? There's a lot of them often haven't been truly clean, and there's a lot of kind of just still kind of sporadic kind of data, and it's just a lot of data challenges. So if that's still a big challenge, any machine learning models could get you that far, but it will not be perfect. And then that's why, and to obviously curate that data, you also need working closely with the business, and it does take kind of a bit more time. So I think broadly, I think the tool and the algorithm works. However, it's important to acknowledge that it's only one of the pieces in a whole ecosystem, and then to also work through it with all your various other teams within the data pipelines as well as the business to co-create and collaborate in this solution.
That's an interesting point. Denis, from a business perspective, how do you get the data science and the BI teams to think for the business? Usually it's the other way around, right? You wait for the business to tell them what to do, and then they'll just do it. Not sometimes because they have too much things to do, sometimes not really sifting through what really is necessary for the business. So how do you actually turn it around?
That is a really good question. And it's one of the things that keep me up night sometimes, because there will be moments that you feel that you are a data or a report factory, right? Like the only thing you are doing is listening and generating, but you need to get away from that. Every business is different, and obviously the culture of the business, and I love that part of my role, which is I really focus on the culture and the data transformation. I always say that, any transformation, but in particular, data transformation is less about technology and more about people. And Conor has been talking about this, and Albert as well mentioning this the whole time. It's trying to gain trust with the business, letting them, making sure that they allow us to be in the room with them when they are talking about not BI requirements, but business conversations. So they see us as a partner, but it's not an easy journey because especially when you join a new business, you need to gain that trust from the beginning. Really try to understand the business, but I think the key is solving value and as soon as possible, and removing technology from the conversations and focusing on them, asking questions, challenging the status quo sometimes. Sometimes you might ask silly questions, sometimes might be questions that are really interesting for them, and they might be, I always say it's like putting some money in the bank. So every time a question is good, you put some money, some trust in the bank, and when you have enough trust, they will allow you to be there in those conversations. But yeah, it's a really good question. I don't have a formula. I wish I had.
Thanks, Denis. Before we move into, there's a question on RPA and intelligent automation. And before we move into that, let's shift focus to RPA itself. And let's set the stage on what are the business cases that is actually driving RPA in data science. Maybe Conor, you can start. One or two business cases that is actually driving RPA.
Well, to be honest, I haven't actually used any RPA tooling in any of my roles. For me, it's just another element of automation. I think there's definitely value to it. So it's something where you can take the human out of the loop to some degree. But in terms of speaking to specific use cases where we've used it, might be better to pass to Albert potentially. I know he said that he'd played with that in the past.
Yes, Albert, what about yourself? Especially rule-based automation for feature engineering, which is which is where a lot of people struggle when it comes to AI. Do you see RPA playing a role there?
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, because for example, if we look back into what are some well-known RPA process, right? Let's say, for example, invoice automations, right? And that used to be done by people, and then now there's a series of processes that triggers on one and each other to kind of make that kind of happen. So I think really within kind of machine learning pipelines, it's quite similar, where I think there's a lot of things that, once we've done a model, when we want to deploy it, we realize there's a lot of kind of manual process. So we can build some, orchestration that's often kind of trigger based in order to kind of just making sure, when this code runs, then, you fire that job. When that job runs, make sure that job fires. So it's basically the principle is almost the same in order to do that. I think feature engineering is an interesting one in itself. It's actually, I don't know whether RPA is a better word or it's kind of a bit of an AI within an AI, but there's a lot of I'll call it frameworks that we develop around kind of feature engineering, because the whole process of RPA is similar, right? It's about you've done it manually many times and then now you want to automate it. Same with feature engineering. You typically do a few things that are similar in feature engineering, right? For example, you're dividing it by key times horizon, you're joining a few different data sets and a few combinations, et cetera, et cetera. So then there is usually some sort of a code framework that we just apply to we create often like kind of macros, insert your variable, and then it just basically replicates it on a massive on a massive scale. And then after that just helps automate a lot of coding that usually data scientists have to do I think repetitively. So I think and interestingly, a lot of what I've talked about has been, again, earlier we did talk about, there are ML tools that, or that do AutoML. They actually do automate a lot of that end to end in terms of kind of the triggering of the jobs, as well as the feature engineering, scoring and the feedback loops as well. So all of them is often kind of included already in there.
Thanks, Albert. Denis, you want to add to that?
No, I don't have a lot of experience with that, because normally what we will do is we will work with IT to do that RPA part. Lately, it's true that it's coming back to us, because sometimes some of the RPA process might be benefit by an ML or AI module. So you might make the RPA process more intelligent using some data science on top. So to try to read PDFs, as Albert, I think you were talking about with the invoicing. So some RPA models or processes can be more intelligent if we use data science, and that's the only thing I've done lately, which is coming back to us now with that part. Yeah.
Thanks. Now, going to the question that one of the audience actually asked is basically with AutoML and maybe intelligent automation, basically adding an ML layer to your RPA. What is the future of the future role of the data scientist? I'll expand it to what is the future role of the data science team. Maybe Conor, you can look at it and give your perspective.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and thanks SG for being engaged in the audience there as well. Yeah, I think it's just like any other area of technology. Things will evolve and the skills and focus will update for the team. So really, if there's something that you can automate, it means you don't have to think about it as much anymore, and you can focus your time on another area that you do have to think about more until that becomes automated as well. So I think, again, I like to just take the view of it as data scientists in a commercial setting. I view the role as trying to create business value using skill sets and tools that we understand. So if you can automate part of that, then that's great. You can still integrate with that and get products out faster. For example, good use cases are, APIs that exist for some out-of-the-box computer vision. You don't need to code your own thing. You can use something and it might be good enough for your use case, or you might have to do some transfer learning or some such thing, but you get to the value faster. So I think that's only a benefit. So if anything, it means you can scale quicker and produce higher value faster, or at least the first version with AutoML. And then maybe you prove out the concept and you want to improve it, and that will take more specialized skills, the traditional like machine learning engineering skills to really optimize those models. Also, I think a really big thing that tends to be overlooked in the data science skill set is there's a lot of machine learning talk, and there's not as much talk about all the other areas of what we broadly call advanced analytics, computational optimization, and interesting statistical methods and so forth that really don't need machine learning. They're quite separate. And I think that is an interesting area that could have a lot of business value, or does have a lot of business value, and is useful for many, many problems, but doesn't have as much focus. So if you automate all the ML stuff, then now you start getting into some interesting other areas until those get automated as well, and it just keeps going. I think it's all just about having fun to create some value, and if something becomes easy, then that's great.
Thanks, Conor.
Can I add something? Sorry. For me, I completely align with you, Conor. I like to compare this as a few years back when we were thinking about self-service BI, which is kind of like automating BI, right? And giving the power to the users. And there was a moment that it was scary. And some people were like, what is going to happen with the BI people? If the business is going to do BI reports, but we're still here. And of course, you start moving to things that are more complex, that are more value, that are more interesting. And the business can self-serve themselves with their own, standard reports, basic operational reports, but we still, have our space. The same happened with advanced analytics and self-service analytics.
Oops, Denis froze there. I think he was just about to explain that maybe Albert should take over. Albert?
Yeah, no, I think it's no, I agree with Denis. It's a very similar thing, that the job's still there, right? I mean, the question is so funny. I was looking, I was shopping at one of the local supermarkets, and this whole, we know that cash registers, and they have those self-service checkout, and a lot of people that used to work in cash registers were just so worried, I'll lose my job. But now they're still there. But what their role now is becoming, I call it the lead supervisor or something, where they're in charge of could be 5 or 10 cash registers, when previously they were only could only do one. All right, so for the business, the ROI is more great, and for that person, actually they think that, look, I actually deliver more, and it's probably less stress to some extent. And I think it's very similar with all this self-service analytics, and even with the AutoML, so that the future role of a data scientist will become more of, I think, a bit like kind of an architect, that you do have to kind of remember, we are in a business profession, right? This is not a kind of in a research, so that work more with the business, understand what type of algorithms to use, and and even broaden the data science specialty, right? And the data science is kind of hard. We talk it, you're a data scientist, but as we all know, who's been there and had education, building models on, let's say, gradient boosting requires a different type of data scientist versus those that might be focused on vectors, or very different for those that are focused on linear programming or optimization. And there's actually a lot of art. So I think it can broaden and becoming more of a kind of, I call it architect-ish.
Actually, I might just add to that example. I thought that was the interesting example, the sort of checkout at a retail, because it highlights as well that the business you're in will evolve. So the problems that they want to understand will evolve, and the role that data science plays in that. So the automation side of things will mean that the things that have held the business back in the past become less of an issue, and they can focus on new areas. Well, those new areas are going to inevitably have some technological components, something where very likely data science will play a part. So even in the checkout example, how do you improve the let's say the camera auto detecting what products are going through the register, or loss prevention type things, or you could imagine lots of different new things that could be applied as the business evolves.
Thanks, Conor. And to the audience, yes, please keep the questions coming, and we have around 10 to 15 minutes. So our panelists down here are eager to answer any of your questions. Now, just shifting focus again to low-code, no-code tools, which is related to AutoML and automation. I want to know, for instance, how a lot of people see this as important for data literacy, as well as driving data science democratization. But what are the practical challenges? People talk about no-code, low-code as if it solves everything, and you suddenly don't have to code at all, and you can create business models or data science models a lot easier. Practically, that's not that simple. I'm just wanting to know how that shifts the discussion with the data science team and the business when it comes to low code and no code. Maybe Albert, you can start the discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Winston. And again, it's a very big part of the question. All right, I think let me kind of reframe. Right, everybody talks about kind of digital transformation, but a lot of people still confuse digital transformation with the different, I call it IT transformation, where it's just mainly replatforming, right? You're going to the cloud, you're migrating 5 systems into one, versus the true digital transformation, where I think it's really changing the way the business works at its core. And if we talk about that, the real digital transformation, then by definition, it makes sense to, when changing the way people working, that they actually need to understand and have a feel being part of the data, right? Because under the old paradigm, if it's just replatforming, yes, somebody, a system analyst will give you a data or a report. But under the new paradigm, no, they also need to be a part of this journey as well. So I think, but of course, like with anything new, it does requires a bit of change, a bit of kind of learning, right? I still remember, for example, many years ago, when I was still kind of probably even at uni, learning Excel was actually daunting. Well, I remember in my first corporate job and seeing everybody on those Excel gurus, I'm like, oh my God, how could I learn that? But obviously these days it's kind of given. It's like, doing Microsoft Word. So same with all these, any new tools, like even data analytics. Yes, the vendors have made it really user-friendly. But again, there's still going to be, some learning. But again, as I mentioned, a lot of it's just in the mind, because, the vendors are very helpful. There's a lot of kind of called micro courses that you can just do bite size in 5 minutes. And some courses even translate, hey, this is how you do it. If you want to do this like Excel, this is how you translate it. So I think it's yes, it requires some training, but I think there's a lot of enablement options out there in the market.
Thanks, Albert. Conor, what about yourself? Experience with low code, no code, lessons learned?
Yeah, I think what Albert said is good. And to add to that, I guess I would say, again, I like to just bring it back to the business value. And you can create a model, sure, but how is it going to be used is the really key question. And I think the things that will improve a model as well, such as how do you engineer features? I haven't seen too many good no or low code solutions that help a non-technical user create features that are valuable. So I would love to see something where you have, oftentimes one of the best ways to get good features is to talk to the subject matter experts and to develop something that resonates with what they think. And then you obviously go and test it out, make sure it actually does in fact help with prediction. But I don't think there's many good ways, unless it's some very simple transformation for a non-technical user to actually create those. So that's one area where you actually, what is the inputs and how do you really get those to work well? How do you identify data issues as a non-technical user so that you know that there's some feature that requires some type of cleanup? And on the other side, let's say you create a model and you have an accuracy metric. Is that the right metric? It probably isn't. It may depend on the situation and how does the business user know how to assess what is good and what isn't. If you have, a classification task where you have highly skewed data, which is, I'd say, most classification tasks, how do you use that? And also, how do you use the output? So, we have plenty of use cases where you might want to classify something, but you don't use all the data. You're not using every record. You might just only care about people that score above or below a certain point. So is the way you want to assess a model across the entire range of its predictions? Or if you have a very specific use case, do you want to customize your metrics and how you're assessing something? And those types of questions. So tying it back to the use case, tying it back to the value, I think those are challenges that I haven't seen any solutions for in these no-code, low-code solutions. And what all it is, I think, is just expanding the lens of what are we trying to solve from purely the ML task to actually it's a business problem that you're trying to solve. So let's extend in both directions. ultimately making it easier to solve that problem. I haven't seen any of that at the moment.
Thanks, Conor. Denis, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to focus. I think Albert and Conor really nail the first part of the question, but I think at the end you mentioned data or analytics democratization. So I'm going to focus on that because for me it's also really interesting and also similar to self-service BI, right? Or data democratization. For me, the biggest challenge is the governance. So you will have a bunch of people around the business with no, technical skills, probably also not only the skills, but the knowledge, as you were saying, Conor, on why are we doing this? It's not just building a model for the sake of building a model because now it's easy and I can drag and drop and do it. So how do you govern all of that? And how you make sure that the people and the business are not making decisions based on those models that haven't gone through any kind of quality check, and we are making the right decisions with the right data. So that is a really beautiful challenge that we are going to face more and more. But I think there are similarities. For example, if I have time, what we did when we roll out self-service BI is that we build kind of a process like a model like Apple. So you know that in Apple, in your iPhone, you can download apps and buy apps, right? So the model, it works that every developer could be a business. We could compare that to a business user doing AutoML. So they are developing their own apps, but if they really want to sell it and they want to publish it and put it into production and let the business use it, in this case, Apple, to sell it, then they need to send it to Apple, which will be the data advanced analytics team, and we will go through a quality process, make sure that they are following the right practices, the data reconciles, that the relevant stakeholders are happy with, the accuracy of the data and the forecast of the model, and then you can actually open that model for the rest of the business.
So it's like an internal marketplace kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Now we are reaching closer to the end of time, and it looks like we could go on with this discussion for quite some time. So let's hit on the data culture, the softer aspect, and I think that's where we have like around 5 minutes on that. I just wanted to know, we are talking about speed with automation, speed in different levels, but speed with automation. And we have AutoML probably putting some power back to the business users with no code and low code. But so the companies can frame problems, make fast decisions. That's the essential outcomes. You get the outcomes faster, you can make a quicker decision. The question then is, practically, does organizational structures get in the way? Because organizations a lot of structures were built at a different era. So I'm just wondering, maybe Albert, you can start that discussion.
Absolutely, it does gets in the way, and to what I alluded, right? A lot of it needs to come from the top in terms of kind of expectations, right? There's a lot of digital transformation that really is just the classic IT transformation. So then, in their point of view is, the users still just send an email to an IT team and you replace IT with data, and then they'll provide an answer type of thing. Yes, I'm still on that paradigm of looking at things. Of course, self-service will never be quite welcome. A lot of business users are like, oh, previously I just sent an email to Albert. It's so easy. Why now you have to tell me to do everything myself, right? But again, but as they probably know, when they want to ask me, I'll have to say, oh, hang on, I have 10 other requests. I have to prioritize. And then, then they might get the answer in maybe, like some time, rather than heck, if they could do it themselves, they could literally, do it in the afternoon and actually understand that and work together with the data team and promote that collaboration. So really, I think it's the perspective, because then I think that will help bridge the whole technology and data. And I've spoken at this topic as well in the past, where there's a lot of people that still thinks data teams are like technology. For example, hey, I cannot build a website. That's too technical. But data is a bit different to like classic technology, where a lot of things have been made to become much more easier and people can play and interact, first as the core and there's still places for that, really hard technical IT, but I think it's just people's perception is still, needs to be kind of reframed in order to kind of, take it to that next level. Because otherwise, all the programs, data literacy and everything else will just there's going to be a lot of roadblocks.
Conor, what about yourself?
I definitely agree. And so to elaborate a little further, I think the comment around if you drive things from the top, you're going to get better change. That's true. It's hard to, ensure that you have a data literate, executive that's probably starting to develop a bit more. Technology has come through, data's coming through now, which is good. But I think it's part of, you mentioned transformations, and I compare the market. So we are doing two transformations. One is the sort of digital technology one, and one is a data one. And part of that is addressing the culture question. So, culture is not just, it incorporates structure. So, for example, how do we engage with the rest of the business? How does the rest of the business engage with us? From program management level, if a program is going ahead, what are going to be the core things that will need to happen? If it's we're an e-commerce site, so we're online, right? So there's not really anything physical. So it's very digital focused, which means any changes will have data implications. So how do we make sure that we have the right governance structures in place so that the development work will bring those along with them? And when it comes to so this is more from the data engineering side of things, which obviously matters crucially for any analytics that you do later. So to that point, how do you, bring the business along to understand its data quality, to understand a common language of how it refers to certain key business terms and what the data actually is that's meant to map to that? How do you do that? How do you then engage in, we like a hub and spoke model, but there's obviously many different approaches to how you structure an analytics team. It, I think, depends a lot on the size of the organization. But that means when you have, hub and spoke model, then in each of the spokes, you can have a different area of focus for that area. You can make sure that the way they engage is relevant to that spoke. You can make sure there's sort of a champion in that area that helps to manage that. But it comes back to the centralized strategic view. I think traditional organizational structures do get in the way, but that's part of changes to help the business understand why some things might need to adjust and bring them along that journey. And to that point, I think it really helps to start with those groups that will be the most on your team. They're champions for it. They really want it. They understand the commitments that are required to be the first, and they will champion the value that gets created. That way you lower the barriers and you heighten sort of the value, and that will then help that ball to get rolling out across the rest of the business.
Thanks, Conor. And Denis, you have 1 minute, maybe just
really quickly. I will just say that we need to be really careful with transformation because it could be digital, it could be data, but happens a lot that you move everything to the cloud and you think you've done digital transformation, but you are doing exactly the same thing that you used to do, but probably more expensive because nothing has changed and there was no extra business value in that transformation. So I guess if you focus on the business and the value that you're doing and on the way you start transforming the business, I think that is a more successful way to transform the business and see some value to the business. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Denis. Thank you, Albert. And thank you, Conor. Really good insights. And thanks for the discussion. And we all learn from engagement. Now, I'd like to invite Jonathan, our CEO, for closing remarks and very interesting initiatives we are just launching. Jonathan?
Great, thanks for that, Winston. And really a huge thank you to our panelists, Albert, Denis, and Conor, for their input. It was really great to hear how you're integrating some of these democratization of data and AI into your organizations and how it's advancing, over time, right, compared to where it was 2 years ago and what you're doing now. And really glad to hear you're incorporating this into the executive and business level within your companies. And also a huge thank you to Sue Lin, Claire, and Dominique for their views on connected data to drive competitive advantage. It was really interesting to see data being used and how it's measured within their organizations, from quicker monthly reporting to incentives used for collaboration with active data usage at CBRE. Very interesting to see some of those initiatives. So now for me, it's just really a couple of final notes from you, our attendees. Really like to thank you for joining us at CDOTrends today. And I would like to ask you that if you enjoyed today's event, if you could register for an upcoming September 8 CDO Australia Summit. That will be a live event in Sydney on September 8. There's a QR code. You can see some of the information there with some of the speakers. I don't think anyone from Hong Kong is here, but if you want to forward to colleagues, we do have an October 19 Hong Kong event. And actually, there is a little bit of homework. I'd like you to look at our awards program that is now planned for December 8. Actually, it'll be in Singapore. But it's actually a regional awards. If I can see there we go, the awards slide. You can look at this on your QR code as well. And what you can do is look through the categories, because we've listed using, research houses like Gartner and IDC, companies who seem to be leaders in some of these categories. But we also want to find out who you think are some of the top chief data officers and digital officers that you've seen around the market, and we'd like those to be nominated. If you could take a moment, we'll be sending this out on a wider basis as well. But this is indeed our 5th anniversary, and so we are trying to celebrate the industry. It really has gone from failed digital projects, failed transformation projects, to now we've got these projects in place, and what are we going to do about the data? And it's been a huge drive ahead, and it's very exciting to see. So there's actually a fair amount of homework at the end of this one, and then the final one, next slide, is that we really would like you to just give us feedback so that we can improve these events. There's also another QR code here. There's about 7 questions. It'd take you less than 60 seconds. If you could help to fill that out, it will give us an idea of upcoming topics, give us an idea of what you want to see with these kinds of events. So really, if you could just take a few minutes to look at some of those QR codes today, that would be very helpful. Thank you indeed for joining. And until the next time, stay safe. And from our panelists, start setting measurable data activities with other business users in your organization, and you'll start seeing a bit more success. Thanks very much. See you next time.